Pushpin disclaimer: this story is a fictionalized account inspired by urban legends and historical rumors surrounding the life of legendary Hollywood actor Errol Flynn. While the setting, character names, and events may reference real people or locations, the supernatural occurrences are purely imaginative and created for entertainment purposes only. This story does not claim to represent any factual evidence of hauntings or paranormal activity and should be treated as a work of creative fiction intended to thrill, entertain, and evoke curiosity. The house sat like a forgotten jewel on the hills of Mulholland Drive, its wide verandas draped in ivy, and its Spanish colonial bones whispering of forgotten laughter and long-vanished fame. Once the dazzling playground of Errol Flynn, the swashbuckling legend of Hollywood's golden age, the mansion was now caught in time, both glamorous and unsettling. Even in the morning light, it had a shadow to it. The grand stone staircases, the carved mahogany railings, and stained glass windows made it feel like something sacred, or perhaps something haunted. Errol Flynn had lived there during the peak of his fame in the 1940s, when scandals followed him as eagerly as fans. The estate was infamous in its day, a place of indulgence, lavish parties, and whispered rumors of darker happenings. There were tales of underground rooms, of wild rituals, and of a strange obsession Flynn had with the occult. Neighbors spoke of masked visitors arriving in the dead of night, and several old Hollywood elites would joke that you never left Flynn's house quite the same. 70 years later, the house still stood proud, though slightly worn, with its iron gates rusted and the once glittering pool now covered with a canvas tarp. It was purchased by a modern-day documentary filmmaker named Mason Hall. A native of New York and no stranger to ghost stories, Mason had made a name for himself filming haunted locations across the country. When he learned that Errol Flynn's former estate was up for sale and that locals refused to live in it, he saw it not as a red flag, but as an opportunity. Mason wasn't moving in alone. He brought his production team with him: Sam, a skeptical sound guy, Rachel, the fearless producer, and Lila, the sensitive camerawoman who claimed to be mildly clairvoyant. Their plan was simple: live in the house for a month, document every creak and whisper, and create a streaming series that explored the intersection of fame and the afterlife. What they didn't realize, however, was that this house didn't need to be explored. It needed to be left alone. On the first night, they settled into their designated rooms. The walls were still lined with vintage wallpaper, some of it peeling away to reveal the original paint underneath, faded burgundy. In Errol Flynn's study, Mason found an old bookshelf still packed with dusty volumes on history, maritime lore, and some obscure occult texts. There was a liquor cabinet, locked but not sealed tight, and above it hung a faded black-and-white portrait of Flynn himself. His eyes, though only ink on paper, seemed to follow Mason as he moved around the room. Rachel found a collection of old film reels in a hidden compartment under the stairs, unmarked, except for a date: November 9th, 1951. They planned to review them once they had the editing equipment set up, but already Lila felt something off. "It's not just history here," she said quietly that night. Something stayed behind. At first, the mansion responded with silence. No slamming doors, no moaning walls. Only an eerie stillness that felt unnatural. They chalked it up to the house settling after decades of partial abandonment. But the staff, landscapers, movers, and a local cleaner refused to work past sunset. One old gardener even made a strange sign of the cross when he loaded the last of the boxes and said, "He's still around, you know. Mr. Flynn never left." Mason brushed it off as small-town superstition. But the deeper they went into Flynn's archives, the more stories emerged, stories about a particular party in 1947 that ended with 2 missing guests, about a room that was supposedly sealed by the actor himself, and about Flynn's increasingly erratic behavior in the last years of his life. Some claimed he believed he was being haunted long before his death. As the crew prepared for their first full night of filming, a cold wind swept through the halls despite every window being shut. Rachel noticed that her camera battery, which had been fully charged, dropped to 0 in seconds. Sam laughed it off, just tech glitches. But Lila stood in the grand foyer, eyes narrowed toward the ceiling. "There's something up there," she whispered. "Something waiting." And so, the adventure began, not as a light-hearted ghost hunt, but as an unwitting invitation into the shadows of one of Hollywood's most enigmatic souls. Errol Flynn's house was more than a relic of fame, it was a stage. And someone, or something, was still waiting for the curtain to rise. It started on the third night, soft at first, like the kind of sound you could easily dismiss as the house settling. The team had just wrapped up filming some B-roll in the garden when Mason, already reviewing footage on his laptop, paused and furrowed his brow. In the background of a clip filmed near the west hallway, there was a faint sound, muffled but unmistakable. A man's laughter. Not just any laugh. It was rich, almost musical, and carried a kind of swagger. It didn't sound like anyone on the crew. And it certainly hadn't come from outside. They brushed it off at first, chalking it up to an old audio echo or even a neighbor. But the estate was tucked far into the hills, shielded by dense foliage and long-abandoned properties. No one nearby. No traffic. No reason to hear that kind of laugh coming from anywhere but inside. The following evening, Rachel was organizing lighting setups near the main staircase when she heard it, louder this time. A man's hearty chuckle, as if amused by some inside joke. She looked around, expecting Sam or Mason to be playing a prank, but the hall was empty. The sound had seemed to come from within the very walls, as if someone were standing just behind the old wooden panels, laughing softly at her surprise. "Did you guys hear that?" she asked through the walkie. Silence. Then Sam replied, annoyed, "Hear what?" "I'm downstairs with Lila." Rachel didn't respond. She didn't want to sound paranoid. Not yet. That night, the scent of vintage cigar smoke began to linger in the corridors. It was strange, not overpowering, but distinctive. Sweet, earthy, and unmistakably from another time. They searched the house for open vents, old ashtrays, maybe even leftover cigars from a long-forgotten drawer. Nothing. It would appear around midnight, swirl around certain rooms for 15 or 20 minutes, and then vanish. Sam, still the skeptic, insisted it was mold or bad insulation. "Old homes leak weird smells," he grumbled. "Doesn't mean we're haunted by Captain Blood himself." But Lila disagreed. She had taken to carrying a small recorder everywhere, whispering questions into it at odd intervals. "Is someone there? What is your name? Are you Errol Flynn?" The recordings played back silence, until one night, after leaving the recorder near the fireplace, she played it back and heard, faintly, a male voice answer one of her questions. She had asked, "Do you still live here?" And in the static that followed, a soft, almost amused response whispered, "Where else would I go?" By now, the entire crew had begun to feel the shift. Mason noticed lights dimming only when he walked into certain rooms. Rachel's watch stopped 3 times in a row around 12:45 a.m. each night. Sam, who mocked the supernatural relentlessly, admitted that he started waking at exactly 3:07 a.m. with the same dream, being in a crowded party full of 1940s music and laughter, except all the guests were staring at him, expressionless, frozen, and silent. They set up infrared cameras, hoping to catch something tangible. The footage was largely uneventful until the camera positioned outside Errol Flynn's old study recorded a door opening and closing on its own. No wind. No wires. Just movement. That same night, Mason found the typewriter in Flynn's office with a new line typed across the paper roll. It read simply, "Don't recast the lead." Even stranger, Sam claimed he began hearing someone humming in the shower. It wasn't the kind of eerie, horror movie humming you'd expect. It was charming, casual, like a man casually singing a tune as he shaved. The song was old, a kind of swing-era melody none of them recognized. When Sam tried to record it, the phone recorded nothing. Only silence. But as soon as he stepped away, the humming would resume. By the end of the week, no one was sleeping comfortably. Doors that had stayed shut were now opening in the middle of the night. Lights flickered without cause. The laughter had grown bolder, now often echoing down long hallways when the house was silent. And always, it seemed to carry an unmistakable air of amusement, as if someone unseen was thoroughly entertained by their discomfort. Lila began writing notes about the behavior of the haunting, predictable patterns, times of activity, scents, even what rooms felt charged. She was convinced it wasn't just any ghost, it was someone who had a sense of humor. Someone who enjoyed attention. Someone who still believed they were the star of the show. And perhaps they were. After all, this was Errol Flynn's house. And in his eyes, the curtain never fell. A week into their stay, Lila stumbled upon a narrow hallway tucked behind an ornate bookshelf in the upstairs library. It had been hidden behind layers of dust and old film canisters, as if time itself had tried to forget its existence. She called for Mason and Rachel, and together they squeezed through the tight corridor until it opened into a long-forgotten chamber, small, circular, and entirely surrounded by antique mirrors. Floor to ceiling, the room was lined with delicate, hand-framed glass panels, their surfaces slightly warped with age. The light that filtered through the old stained glass window at the top gave the room a dreamlike, surreal quality. It was as though they had stepped into another dimension. The group dubbed it the Mirror Room. Mason was instantly fascinated. "I've researched this house for months, and there's no record of this room. Nothing in the blueprints, nothing in the interviews. It's like it was intentionally erased." They speculated it had been Flynn's private dressing room, or perhaps a secretive retreat. Given his notorious charm and the constant parties, it wasn't unthinkable that he had a space for more personal affairs. Lila, however, didn't feel excitement. She felt dread. That night, she returned alone with a handheld camera to film some atmospheric B-roll. The house was quiet, the only sounds were the occasional creaks of old wood beneath her feet. As she stood in the middle of the mirror room, she began slowly panning the camera around the circle, catching the strange reflections of the antique mirrors. In one of them, her camera froze. She saw a flash of red, a figure, faint but distinct, standing behind her in the mirror. Lila turned instantly. No one was there. She pointed the camera again, nothing. But when she reviewed the footage on her laptop an hour later, there it was, a woman. She was dressed in a deep red satin gown, the style unmistakably 1940s, with soft curls cascading around her face. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes were locked onto Lila's, even through the screen. Shaken, Lila didn't tell the others right away. She wanted to be sure it wasn't a trick of light or a software glitch. But the following night, Rachel had her own encounter. As she passed the mirror room on her way to bed, she glanced inside and stopped cold. There, in the furthest panel, she saw the same woman in red. But this time, she was moving. Slowly, deliberately, she pressed her hand against the inside of the mirror, her lips forming a single word, "Errol." Rachel screamed. The team rushed to her, but the mirror showed only their own frightened reflections. Still, Rachel was pale and visibly shaking. She insisted it wasn't a hallucination. "She was trying to come through," she whispered. "She wanted someone to know she's here." Mason began researching further and discovered a troubling footnote in a biography on Flynn. There had been rumors of a woman, a young actress named Violet Langley, who had disappeared in 1947 after attending one of Flynn's infamous parties. Her career was just beginning, and she had reportedly been romantically linked to him. She was last seen wearing a red satin gown. The more they dug, the more pieces fell into place. Violet had been cast in a minor role in one of Flynn's films, but her scenes were mysteriously cut. There were whispers of her being too close to the star, and that she had threatened to reveal something about him, something darker than his usual scandals. She vanished just weeks later. Suddenly, the mirror room wasn't just eerie, it felt like a trap. A time capsule holding the memories and spirits of people long erased by Hollywood history. Every time someone entered it, something lingered. Lights flickered more violently, camera batteries drained faster, and the scent of Violet's perfume, roses, and ash filled the air. Sam finally agreed to spend one night in the room alone, to disprove the idea that it was truly haunted. He set up 4 cameras, lit a single candle, and waited. For 3 hours, nothing happened. But then, on the playback, one of the cameras recorded something horrifying. At 3:16 a.m., A woman's face appeared in the glass just behind Sam, whispering a phrase over and over. "He promised me the lead. He promised me." The woman in red had a story, and she wasn't done telling it. Mason decided they needed to uncover the full truth. This was no longer just about Errol Flynn's lingering charm or legacy. It was about a forgotten life, a silenced voice trapped within the reflective prison of a stars-haunted past. By the 10th night, the strange occurrences inside the house had become routine: flickering lights, phantom footsteps, whispers caught on audio that hadn't been spoken aloud. But it was the poolside guest house that changed everything. Originally built as a private retreat for Errol Flynn's closest companions, he would say things like, "By Jove," and "darling," and referred to Rachel as Miss Producer in a jokingly flirtatious tone. They assumed he was just mocking the period style of the house, until he began quoting lines from old Errol Flynn films without realizing it. "What light through yonder window breaks," he once mumbled as he stood on the guest house porch, cigar in hand, a cigar no one saw him light or bring in. Rachel confronted him. "What are you doing, Sam? Are you messing with us?" Sam blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I'm just enjoying the evening. Can a man have a smoke in peace?" But Sam didn't smoke, and no one had brought cigars. That night, Lila set up a hidden GoPro camera inside the guest house while Sam was out. When they reviewed the footage the next morning, it chilled them to the core. Around 2:43 a.m., the camera caught Sam entering the room, shirt unbuttoned, muttering to himself in a voice that was not quite his own. He stood in front of the small mirror above the guesthouse bar, staring at his reflection. Then he smiled. A wide, theatrical grin. "They still want me," he said. "Even now, they remember." He raised a glass of whiskey to the mirror and laughed. Not Sam's laugh, Errol's. The same deep, charismatic chuckle they had all heard echoing through the walls. Sam then began mimicking sword-fighting stances from Captain Blood, stumbling dramatically across the room, reciting lines with uncanny accuracy and rhythm. Then, suddenly, he stopped. He stared into the camera as if he knew it was there. His expression blinked. "You're trespassing," he whispered. Mason immediately called for a team meeting. They needed to pull Sam out of the guest house. But when they tried, he resisted. "I'm fine," he shouted. "I've never felt better in my life. I'm finally getting it, Mason. The role, the presence, this is what it means to be iconic." They managed to coax him out by pretending they were reviewing footage and needed his help. Once back in the main house, Sam's behavior returned to normal, mostly. But he complained of headaches, confusion, and waking up feeling like he'd been performing all night. Lila, terrified, began keeping notes of his behavior patterns and started researching possession phenomena. What she found was unnerving. In several occult traditions, mirrors and alcohol were considered conduits for spirit attachment, especially in places charged with strong emotional energy. Rachel discovered an old article tucked in a collector's magazine about Flynn's interest in mysticism. One photograph, believed to be taken during a private gathering, showed Flynn and several guests seated in a circle in the very guest house, surrounded by mirrors and candles. The caption read, "The Ritual of Eternal Presence, a curious indulgence of Flynn's final years." That same night, Sam was found outside the guest house at 4 a.m., soaking wet and standing near the edge of the drained pool, mumbling to himself about missed scenes and script rewrites. When questioned later, he had no memory of how he got there. The crew had no choice but to seal the guest house. They placed caution tape over the door, covered the mirrors, and unplugged every electrical device inside. Lila left a bowl of salt at the entrance. "Whatever was trying to wear him like a costume," she said, "isn't finished." Sam agreed to sleep near the others from that point forward, but his confidence was shaken. "It wasn't a dream," he confessed quietly to Mason. "Something was in me. And I don't think it was trying to scare us. I think it wanted the spotlight again." The realization settled heavily on them all. They weren't simply dealing with a haunting. They were dealing with a performance, an encore by a spirit that didn't know how to exit the stage. After the incident with Sam, the team reached a unanimous decision. Something had to be done. The strange behaviors, the sightings, the whispering voices, it was all escalating. What had begun as a documentary project had turned into a dangerous descent into something they no longer understood. It was Lila who first suggested it. "We need to make contact," she said one morning, voice low, eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. "Not just observe. Not just record. We need to ask it what it wants." Mason hesitated. He had seen enough during past investigations to know seances could be unpredictable, even traumatic. But Rachel, who had always been skeptical, was beginning to break. The night before, she had been woken by the sound of someone singing directly into her ear. When she opened her eyes, the room was empty, but her bedsheets were damp with the scent of cologne. So they agreed. They would conduct a seance, on camera, in the very heart of the house, Errol Flynn's old study. They invited a local psychic named Daria Wells, a middle-aged woman with a quiet presence and a reputation for cleansing old Hollywood estates. She had heard of the Flynn house but never dared approach it. "There are places," she warned gently as she entered the foyer, "that don't forget. And some people don't know how to leave." That night, they arranged the seance at Flynn's favorite desk. The lights were dimmed. Candles flickered in the corners of the room. The group sat in a circle, Mason, Rachel, Lila, Sam, and Daria, hands joined, eyes closed, cameras rolling. The room felt colder than usual. Daria instructed everyone to clear their thoughts, open their minds, and speak no words unless spoken to. The air seemed to pulse with energy. "Spirit of this house," Daria began, her voice soft but firm, "if you are with us, we invite you to speak. If you are Errol Flynn, we mean no harm. We only seek understanding." For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then, the candle flames flickered violently, as if a gust of wind had blown through, but every door and window was sealed. Sam's chair creaked sharply as he shifted, his hand tightening in Mason's grip. Daria's eyes snapped open. "Someone is here," she whispered. "But he's not alone." That's when the lights died. Total darkness. Only the candlelight remained. Lila let out a short gasp. The mirror behind the desk began to cloud, fogging over without any physical contact. In its haze, a shadow appeared. Broad shoulders. A sharp jaw. And then, a smile. "He's here," Rachel whispered. Suddenly, Daria's head jerked back as if struck. Her voice changed deeper, foreign, theatrical. She laughed softly. "They never wanted me to leave. I was the show." Her body tensed. "But now you bring cameras again. More lights. An audience." The voice was unmistakably male. Smooth. Commanding. It didn't sound like Daria anymore. "You're wearing his face," Mason said quietly. "But you're not Errol Flynn." The laughter turned into a growl. Daria's body trembled violently. "He was the door," the voice snarled. "I walked through him." Lila screamed. One of the candles flew across the room, slamming into a wall and extinguishing. Papers from the desk whipped into the air as if caught in a cyclone. The cameras began to malfunction, static, distortion, flashes of black and white like old film reels skipping frames. Then silence. Daria collapsed forward onto the desk, gasping for breath. Her voice returned to normal, shaking. "It's not Flynn," she cried. "It's something older. Something that used him, like a stage." The group sat in stunned silence, their minds reeling from what they'd witnessed. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't Errol's spirit stuck in his old home. It was something else. Something that had taken Flynn's image, fed off the glamour, the attention, the infamy, and stayed behind long after the man himself was gone. The house didn't just remember Errol Flynn. It remembered the thing he let in. That night, Rachel packed her things. "I'm not staying another night in this place," she told Mason. "Whatever that thing was, it's not done. It doesn't want us to tell the story, it wants to become the story." Sam said nothing. He sat on the stairs, staring into the darkness, lips quietly mouthing something only he could hear. And far above them, in the guest house window, a single light flickered on. After the seance, everything changed. The air inside the house felt heavier, like walking through fog that couldn't be seen, only felt. Rachel left without saying goodbye. Sam became increasingly silent, often staring off into corners as though someone were whispering in his ear. and Lila refused to enter the mirror room again. It was Mason who chose to stay focused, determined to get to the root of it all. If this thing wasn't Errol Flynn, at least not anymore, then what was it? And why was it so drawn to the memory of one man? He started by revisiting everything he could find on Flynn's final years: studio records, unpublished biographies, newspaper clippings, even gossip columns long thought irrelevant. Flynn's reputation was one of contradiction: charming but reckless, adored but feared. His charisma was magnetic, but beneath it lurked something darker, something no studio dared put on the record. One headline from 1952 caught Mason's attention: "Studio cancels film premiere without explanation. Flynn unavailable for comment." Another article dated the same week noted that a rising actress named Violet Langley had vanished the day after attending a party at Flynn's estate. No foul play was officially declared, but whispers in the press hinted at something buried, literally and figuratively. The most disturbing clue came from an anonymous letter published in a fringe Hollywood newsletter shortly after Flynn's death in 1959. The author, simply signed CT, claimed to have attended a private gathering of stars and shadows at Flynn's home in the summer of '47. The letter spoke cryptically of strange rituals, blood spilled not for violence, but for favor, and a mirror that showed the truest self, even if it wasn't yours to begin with. The letter ended ominously. He didn't summon it. He welcomed it. And once it wore him, it never left. Mason dug deeper into the house's history and came across blueprints that revealed yet another sealed chamber beneath the study, listed in old floor plans as the trophy room. The room had long been sealed behind a false wall, and according to studio lore, Flynn had it closed off in 1950 without explanation. Mason knew what he had to do. With help from a contractor who owed him a favor, Mason had the wall opened. Dust billowed out like the breath of a sleeping beast, and behind it stood a door, solid oak, bound in metal, with an iron handle that felt unnaturally cold to the touch. Inside was something straight out of a fever dream. The trophy room wasn't filled with awards or memorabilia, as expected. Instead, it was a private museum of obsession. On the walls were framed photographs of Flynn at parties, many featuring guests who had vanished or died under strange circumstances. In the center stood a pedestal with a large, gilded mirror, its surface darkened, as if something had burned into it from the inside. More disturbing were the items arranged around the base: voodoo charms, scraps of paper written in Latin, wax-sealed letters addressed to the keeper of the gate, and even film reels labeled not with movie titles, but with names. Violet Langley, Carl Truitt, Nadine Marlowe. Mason felt a wave of nausea. He realized Flynn had been experimenting with something: rituals to preserve his fame, perhaps his very soul. But whatever he had reached for didn't just answer back, it moved in. Mason took photographs of everything and sent copies to Lila. She was horrified, but unsurprised. "He opened a door and never closed it," she said. "And that thing, it's still playing him like a role." As Mason reviewed the film reels in a secure space outside the house, what he saw terrified him. Footage of the missing guests, clearly uncomfortable, being interviewed on camera by Flynn. But the footage was strange, jerky, looped, as if time was being bent. In one reel, Violet looked directly into the lens and mouthed, "Get out." The more Mason studied, the clearer it became. The entity had taken on Flynn's face because Flynn had given it permission. In return, Flynn enjoyed continued charisma, power, and reverence. But the price was steep. Others disappeared, consumed like footnotes in a script rewritten by something that didn't want to die. This wasn't just a haunting. It was a possession that never ended. A symbiotic relationship between a fading celebrity and an ancient, nameless hunger that fed on attention, vanity, and memory. And now, with cameras rolling again, it was hungry once more. The night Mason decided to return to the trophy room, the house seemed to sense it. The lights dimmed without cause. The walls groaned with age, but not like with settling, more like something restless shifting inside them. Outside, thunder rolled over the Hollywood hills, though the skies were eerily clear. Mason had spent the past day reviewing every reel, every letter, every image. Each piece pointed to one undeniable truth: This thing, whatever it was, had taken root in the very bones of the house. The trophy room wasn't just a sanctuary for Flynn's ego, it was a stage for the entity that had worn him like a skin. Lila tried to stop him. "If you open that room again," she warned, "you're inviting it back in full." Mason nodded. "I know. But if we don't face it, it will keep feeding. And I think it's already starting again." Sam had begun mumbling lines in his sleep, phrases lifted directly from Flynn's old films. Rachel, even after leaving the estate, reported seeing a man in a red silk robe standing at the foot of her hotel bed one night, smiling with a voice that wasn't his. The entity was expanding its reach. And Mason had to stop it. He returned to the trophy room alone, camera in hand. The moment he opened the door, the air shifted, sharp and metallic, like ozone after a lightning strike. The mirror at the center had grown darker since his last visit. It no longer reflected the room, only a silhouette, warping like a moving shadow behind glass. He approached the pedestal slowly. "I know what you are now," he said, his voice firm, steady. "You're not Errol Flynn. You're just wearing him. But the show's over." The mirror pulsed. Then a voice came, not aloud, but directly in Mason's mind. Smooth, seductive, confident. "No." The curtains just rising. The mirror flashed. Suddenly, Mason was standing not in the trophy room, but in a twisted version of Flynn's study, larger, darker, lit by flickering candlelight. The walls were lined with distorted movie posters that changed when he looked too long, faces melting, smiles turning into snarls. Ghostly party music played in the background. It wasn't real. It was a construct. The entity's theater. In front of him, Errol Flynn appeared. Or rather, the thing pretending to be him. He looked exactly as he had in his prime, charismatic, confident, dazzling in his tuxedo. But his eyes, they were hollow. Empty voids brimming with something ancient. "You came back for the truth," the figure said, grinning. "Let me give you a scene worth remembering." The ghost lunged. But Mason didn't flinch. He raised a hammer he had hidden in his bag, swung hard, and struck the mirror. It cracked. The illusion shattered instantly. The music cut off. The room snapped back to reality, the trophy room, silent and stale. The mirror, however, was now spider-webbed with fractures. Something inside it howled, not audibly, but in Mason's head. 1,000 screams, layered atop one another, all begging, threatening, pleading to be remembered. The lights exploded above him. A force threw Mason backward into the wall. Dazed, bleeding from his scalp, he crawled to his feet, heart pounding. He lifted the hammer again. This time, he didn't hesitate. He brought it down with all his strength. The mirror shattered completely. As the shards scattered across the floor, a wave of wind, hot and angry, swept through the room, followed by a deep silence that seemed to pull everything into itself. The house creaked, then settled. It was over. Or so he thought. Later that night, as Mason sat reviewing the footage from his camera, he noticed something chilling in the final frame. Just before the mirror shattered, the reflection didn't show him standing with the hammer, it showed Flynn, grinning as if proud. And in the audio, buried beneath the noise, a soft whisper lingered. "There's always another screen." Mason exhaled, leaned back in his chair, and looked around the darkened study. Maybe he had ended the ritual. Maybe he had just given it a new audience. Weeks passed since the destruction of the trophy room mirror, but the events at Errol Flynn's former estate left a permanent scar on everyone involved. Mason tried to go back to his old life, writing, documenting paranormal cases with detached curiosity, but something had shifted inside him. The Hollywood house had opened a door he couldn't shut. And as much as he wanted to believe the entity was gone, the signs suggested otherwise. The house sat strangely quiet in the aftermath. The laughter, the footsteps, the whispers in the mirror all silenced. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It felt forced, like a theater before the next performance. Mason, despite every instinct screaming to stay away, returned one final time to check on the house. He found dust settling where chaos had ruled. The heavy drapes no longer fluttered. The temperature no longer dropped. The air was still, almost too still. But a detail caught his attention: fresh cigar ash in the old crystal tray by the fireplace. And the faintest trace of old cologne hung in the air, the same one Lila had described from her first night there. Someone, or something, had lit a cigar after the room had been sealed. Mason didn't wait around. He knew what that meant. Whatever presence they had disturbed, whatever mask it had worn, it wasn't completely exorcised. Perhaps it never could be. Because it wasn't just a spirit, it was a memory. A persona so grand, so indulgent, so adored, that it refused to fade. It had lived on in films, in books, in gossip, and now it had found new mediums. Across town, Rachel, now back in her apartment, still had nights where she'd wake to a knock on her closet door, always 3 sharp taps, always at 2:13 a.m. She never opened it. Sam checked into rehab not long after, blaming a voice in his head that wouldn't stop reciting monologues from Captain Blood and the adventures of Robin Hood. And Lila left Los Angeles altogether, settling in a quiet coastal town in Oregon where she refused to talk about what happened, except to say that she never watches old movies anymore. As for Mason, he tried to share the story. He submitted his final documentary, Haunting the Stars, The Spirit of Errol Flynn, to an independent film festival. It was screened once, late at night in a half-empty theater. And something strange happened during the viewing. The projection glitched repeatedly at the same moment, right before the mirror shattered. Each time, a frame appeared on screen that Mason swore wasn't in the final cut, a brief image of Flynn smiling directly at the camera, lifting a glass in salute. The audience thought it was part of the show. But Mason hadn't included it. Worse, afterward, several audience members claimed to smell cigar smoke in the theater lobby. One swore they heard a voice behind them whisper, "Did you enjoy the performance?" But turned around to find no one there. It was then Mason realized the truth. Destroying the mirror hadn't ended the haunting. It had merely changed the format. The entity didn't need a house anymore. It had been fed by attention, memory, and reverence for decades. And now it had been filmed, shared, viewed. Errol Flynn's ghost had become part of the very medium he once ruled. A week later, Mason received a letter in the mail, no return address. Inside was a glossy, black-and-white headshot of Flynn, signed in red ink. To Mason, "Thanks for keeping the legend alive. See you on the next set." Mason stared at it for hours before finally burning it in his fireplace. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't make a difference. Because some stars never fade. Some ghosts don't need chains or haunted halls. In Hollywood, legacy is the strongest form of immortality. And Errol Flynn, in charm or in shadow, had found a way to stay forever. So if you ever visit the Hollywood Hills and find yourself near an old estate shrouded in trees, listen closely. You might hear laughter. Or catch the scent of cigar smoke drifting on the breeze. And if you hear a voice say, "Welcome to the show," turn around carefully. The curtain may have risen again. 72.